Hello, in this third video on arpeggios, I'm going to show you how you can take some of the patterns that we've already covered and play them in a more improvisational, melodic way. I'm also going to show you an exercise that you can use to really improve your familiarity and versatility with these arpeggios and just show you some simple ways to get started. So before we dive into the improvisational stuff, let's just recap the basic patterns that I covered in the first video. So pattern number one, starting on the middle finger. Pattern number two, starting on the index finger, and pattern number three, starting on the fourth finger. And again, you can play those starting on pretty much any note on the fretboard. So pattern number one from E, pattern number two, pattern number three. There you go. So the first step of this exercise that I'm going to show you is finding the first note up an octave, or moving that first note up an octave and adding it to the end of our arpeggio. So you'll have a 4-note arpeggio rather than a 3-note arpeggio. Once again, from G, it'll look and sound like this if we go pattern by pattern. So that was G, B, D, G, D, B, G. Pattern number two, pattern number three. There you go. The great thing about that is it opens up the second octave for us to visualize and become familiar with. So once we've found that G up an octave, we can use the same three patterns that we used in the first octave to create a 2-octave arpeggio. So let's say pattern number 1 and pattern number 2. That will look like this. There you go. Let's go pattern number 3, pattern number 2. And so on and so forth. And you can do that across the entire fretboard. So that's a really great way to get used to visualizing your arpeggios across 2 octaves. The next part of this exercise is to really pay attention to the physical transition between each pattern and doing your best to make it as smooth as possible. Some patterns or some pattern combinations will work better than others. There's no right or wrong way to play, or there's no right or wrong finger pattern to use for each arpeggio, but the main thing is to become aware of the movement. I've been thinking of this as like bass yoga or something, and you'll see why in a second. Let's take pattern number 1 and pattern number 1 and pattern number 1. Let's do that one. So that moment of transition, we've got our 4th finger on the D, on the 5th fret of the A string, and we're transitioning to middle finger on the G on the 5th fret of the D string. So that's a little bit, or it can be a little bit of an awkward transition. It's not the most comfortable on first go, I guess. It's pretty clunky. So how can we make it smoother? How can we make it more effective? And that's where we're going to pay attention to this specific moment. So we're at the 5th fret with our pinky, and then if we're gonna prepare for that next arpeggio, then when the 4th finger lands on that D note, in order to prepare in the best way possible, we're going to have to move that middle finger as close to that the G note as possible without compromising the note that we're playing. Which, as you can probably see, as I'm trying to do as good a job of as possible, my hand's going to contract and maybe even pivot a little bit on that 4th finger to make that So that's taking the existing finger pattern and just paying attention to that very specific moment of transition and giving some time for our brain to go, oh, that's not very smooth. How can we do it as smoothly as possible? Another process you might want to follow is finding a different combination of fingers to use in that setting. And as a rule of thumb, no pun intended, alternating fingers is the way to go. So for example, for that one, pattern number one and pattern number one, a way that I really like to play this combination is middle finger, index finger, and then middle finger again. So then I can I can play that G with my third finger, index finger on the B on the fourth fret of the G string, and then pinky on that D on the seventh fret of the G string. And if you look at if we look at that motion, nice and slowly, especially those last four notes, because I'm alternating my fingers, each finger has time to get in position for the note that it's about to play. And that makes it a super smooth way to play that arpeggio. So just like with yoga, something I don't have a lot of experience with, but just like with yoga, I think by paying attention to those movements and how our body's navigating this particular challenge, we can make it a lot smoother, a lot more effective, and we can do it without tension, or aim to do it with as little tension as possible, which is how you play bass sustainably. So that's the exercise, those two parts. So visualizing the different patterns, or the patterns across two octaves, and then practicing those transitions to make them as smooth as possible. Now, I probably should have prefaced all that with saying that doing this exercise is not a prerequisite for improvisation. This is just something that will enhance your versatility with these arpeggios. Really, all you need to improvise is to pay attention to the sounds that you're creating and choosing different ones based on how you feel about them. That's really what it is. That's all it comes down to. But doing this exercise will help you play within a chord and know which notes are going to sound great with a chord that, let's say, a guitarist or a piano player or a backing track or whatever is playing. So, a really simple way to get started with this is to find, let's say, you could find a drone note, let's say in this case a G. You could find a backing track that plays on one chord for a while. You could find a willing friend who can play a G major chord on the guitar or piano, and I suggest just testing out some different patterns across the two octaves and seeing what you like, seeing what notes and what patterns sound good to you. And you can do it either sort of free time or in time, and you can sort of, I guess, practice your groove as well. But for example, that might sound like G major chord, and I just happened to pick a random place in the arpeggio to start and tested out some of the sounds. I'll do it again. The first few times you do that exercise or do that process, you might find, whoa, I don't really know how to smoothly play the phrases that I want. That's part of the point of the exercise, is you go, oh, that's a new pattern that I want to try. Don't quite know how to play it, but I'm going to work it out. The next exercise that I would suggest testing out is, once you feel comfortable in one arpeggio, is adding another one or even two. Let's start with one. So let's say you're playing on a G major arpeggio and then moving to a C major arpeggio. This is an incredible exercise because it'll get used to changing with chords as they move by. And you can actually do this without any accompaniment as well. So you might go, for example, G major, to C, back to G, back to C. Ooh, so I added in a little scale note there because I felt like that would sound good. And maybe more on scales and scale improvisation in a future video. But adding different chords in and being really strict about using just those arpeggio notes will really help you create the sound of different chords and different chord progressions when there's no accompaniment going by. And if you're playing with someone else, someone who's going from, let's say, G on the guitar to C on the guitar, and you're able to change your arpeggio with them, it'll sound like you're really reinforcing the chord changes as they go by. And being able to change arpeggio at any point on the bass or the guitar is really vital to having that kind of versatility. So rather than, say, starting on G and then going to C and having to start on this C every time, practicing landing on the E of the C arpeggio or the G of the C arpeggio, or connecting to the B of the G major arpeggio. All of these will lead you to some really incredible sounds. So, for example, a smooth way to connect the C major arpeggio to the G major arpeggio is landing on that C and then going straight to the B of the G major arpeggio. And these are the beautiful little things that you'll find as you practice this exercise. You'll find really nice ways to connect between different arpeggios, and you're well on your way, if you can do that, to being able to improvise some really nice melodies over basic chord progressions. So hopefully that helps. Happy practicing and enjoy.